An ex-Spurs manager has poured more scorn on Tottenham chairman Daniel Levy as it's revealed he won't even help him sell his autobiography in the club shop when the proceeds go to charity. Meanwhile, Sonny saves Korea, Harry Kane saves England, wasn't it ever just? And Chelsea are dealt yet another blow just when they thought a new stadium might be coming their way. All this and more in today's daily Premier League news with me, Barnaby Slater. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Please do press that like button. Please do press subscribe if you're not already a subscriber for daily Premier League news. And of course, you can become a member, only £1 a month. All the details of how in the description box below. But let's get going and starting with those World Cup qualifiers over in Asia. South Korea were drawing 1-1 away in Amman. In that World Cup qualifier, they're not on a great run of form, South Korea. But then, in the 82nd minute, leaving it late, Heung-min makes it 2-1. And then in the 101st minute, Sonny assists Ju Min-kyu to make it 3-1. The captain making it all about him. What a player Son Heung-min is. What would South Korea do without him? Stepping up for his country once again. His numbers for that game against Oman are as follows. 40 touches, 5 touches in the opposition box. Possession won over 4 times. 3 chances created. 3 shots, 3 duels won, 3 fouls won, 2 assists and 1 goal. And he was involved in all 3 of South Korea's goals. So, look, let's face it, international football, not that exciting. The Premier League is back now this week with the North London derby, but it's worth looking at what some of those Tottenham players are doing, and our captain Son Heung-min stepping up for his country once again. Like I said, what a player. We're so lucky to have him. As I always say, sign him up on a 12-year contract, give him an ambassadorial role, make him a coach, do whatever it takes. He's the face of the club. Next bit of Spurs news. Danny Rose has done an in-depth interview where he's talked about all things Tottenham, not only about his time at the club, but also what he thinks about Spurs since and the chairman. So I'm going to bring some quotes to you because this is incredibly fascinating. Danny Rose, never afraid to tell it how it is. Not many footballers, even ex-footballers, are willing to be as outspoken as Danny Rose. Let me know in the comments what you think of Danny Rose, what his legacy is like from his time at Spurs. Was he unfortunate that he never got his kind of big move around the same time that Kyle Walker did? Because if you remember, Manchester City, I think, wanted to pay about £100 million for both of our fullbacks during the Pochettino years. And in the end, it was only Kyle Walker who got his move there. And then Danny Rose really kind of languished for a lot of the rest of his career at Spurs. And as I'll tell you what he talks about it here, he saw out the rest of his contract when, Daniel Levy, let's just put it this way, he did not want him to do that. Anyway, Danny Rose was asked about Spurs now under Ange Postecoglou, and he said the following. I went to Old Trafford last season and watched them play versus Man United. And watching them live, seeing how they play, I left the game asking my friends, do you think this team could be like the one I was part of? By which I know he means he sees something in them. He sees something positive. He sees a style of play. He sees a little bit more of an aggression than maybe Spurs have had in the last few years. He sees something building, and that to me is incredibly exciting. And I'm pretty sure, let me know in the comments if I'm wrong actually, I'm pretty sure Danny Rose went and sat with the Spurs fans at Old Trafford for that game. He's still got a big love for Tottenham Hotspur, despite the kind of slightly sour way in which it ended at Spurs for him. I like Danny Rose. I think he's right. I think Spurs are building towards something that could potentially be as strong or maybe even stronger than those Pochettino years. He was also asked if he thinks Tottenham could be considered as title contenders this year. He said, I'm not sure I can say that because I find it really disrespectful to Man City, who have been there year after year since Guardiola got there. It would be disrespectful to Liverpool, who've been there or thereabouts year after year, and now Arsenal are there too. So for me, I don't think Spurs have earned the right to say that they're going to be title challengers this year. I don't think it's fair for them to say that just yet. I'd have to agree again. I think any talk of a potential title tilt this year, it's too early to say it. Look, if we were to turn over the old enemy on Sunday at 2 o'clock, then maybe that's something we could look towards. Can we put together a run that would enable us to be put in that conversation? I should say also some news just come out this morning that the PGMOL have decided that Arsenal will wear their away kit for the first time in something like 30 years at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and that is due to a kit clash with Arsenal's current home shirt. It's deemed to have too much white on it and therefore will create a clash with Tottenham's home kit. So Arsenal, even though they suggested they could wear their red shirts with red socks and red shorts, the PGMOL turned that down, and now Arsenal will wear their black kit at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Just a little side fact there. Danny Rose was then asked about his memories of the Champions League final and what he thought about it. He said, had we not given away a penalty in the first 30 seconds or whatever, maybe we could have won. But because of how that happened, all the training we'd done for 3 weeks just went out the window in the first minute of the game. Guys, let me know in the comments your thoughts on that Champions League final. The way I describe it is always 22 seconds of fun. I went to Madrid. I enjoyed it for 22 seconds before Moussa Sissoko naively stuck his arm in the air. I think he was pointing towards his other defenders, asking them to cover a runner, but just a kind of slightly naive thing to do. And I genuinely think Sadio Mane purposely kicked the ball into what was his armpit. So it shouldn't have been given as a handball. It shouldn't have been a penalty. But you're letting the referee make a decision. And also, I think that was one in the early days of VAR as well, and they didn't even look at it. So it was very unfortunate, but I hear exactly what Danny Rose is saying. They'd had a long 3-week break since the last game, which I think was home to Everton. And they did loads of training about how to counteract Liverpool, about how to beat that Liverpool side. And when you're 1-0 down after 22 seconds, panic sets in, and it will have been very hard to kind of stick to that game plan. And as a result, if you remember it, my recollection of that final is that Spurs were, they had a lot of the ball, but didn't make any gilt-edged chances as well, at all, sorry. And Harry Kane gets a lot of stick, doesn't he? Because Pochettino picked Harry Kane ahead of Lucas Moura. Kane hadn't played for a long time. But I always say, if Mauricio Pochettino had picked Lucas Moura over Harry Kane and we'd still lost that game, I'm not sure Pochettino would have got out of there alive. I think we all wanted Kane to play. Yes, he definitely wasn't fit. It was very similar actually to how he was in the Euros just this past summer. He looked about 50-60% fit at best. But in reality, if we'd made any gilt-edged chances in that game, you would have wanted them to go to Harry Kane. I personally believe that. But let me know in the comments if you think differently. And it's all subjective, so that's absolutely fine if you do. Meanwhile, Danny Rose went on to talk a little bit about his Google comments regarding transfers. You remember the famous comments he made where it's like every time a new transfer came into Spurs, he had to Google them to try and find out who they were and how frustrating that was because he wanted Spurs to add a few more big-name players into the squad. He said, I'm not saying it's just the chairman making the signings. There have been some directors of football at the club who really need to be answering the questions about some of the players they brought in too. Well, he gave an interview a few weeks ago that I talked about on my video where he really went in hard on Franco Baldini, who, if you remember, he became our director of football. And he had previously been, if memory serves, he'd been assistant to Fabio Capello as England manager. And let's just say Danny Rose did not like the cut of Baldini's jib. It feels like maybe he's going in on him as well there. Paul Mitchell was another sporting director of football who was in charge in Danny Rose's era, but he did pretty well, didn't he? He got a few good signings over the line, and him and Pochettino had a very close relationship. So I think he's probably talking mainly about Baldini. He also went on, Danny Rose, talking about knowing with 18 months left that his Spurs contract wouldn't be renewed. He said this, he said, that's football. I had a meeting with the chairman and I told him that I wasn't leaving until my contract was finished and that I wanted to honour that contract. I told him that I knew what was coming. I knew they'd take my number off me, send me to train with the under-23s, and he looked at me like he didn't know what language I was speaking, as to say that they would never do that to me. And then I returned for the first day of pre-season and they do it. So it wasn't a shock. In the end, I honoured my contract and that's all there is to it. Do you know what this tells me? I think Danny Rose is just an honest bloke, a humble he's from Leeds, isn't he? A humble, down-to-earth guy. And he likes to say it as it is. And if you remember a little bit from that Amazon documentary, actually, he did always say it as it was, didn't he? He knocked on the chairman's door all the time. You remember that thing where he's like, what about Milan? I heard there was some interest from Milan. And nothing came to pass. And it sounds there like he's having a bit of a dig at Daniel Levy. I know he doesn't hate Daniel Levy because I've seen some quotes from him as well that say that since he's left the club, Levy's been really helpful towards him. But what's clear about Daniel Levy that keeps coming up over and over, and I'll be talking more about Levy later in this episode, is that when it comes to business, he is absolutely ruthless. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's a terrible person when it comes to personal stuff, because Danny Rose has said that as well. But when it's business, he is not afraid to get a player out the door, and he will do whatever it takes. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think Levy is too brutal, too ruthless when it comes to that stuff? Maybe let me know in the comments, but also I will be talking a little bit about what I spoke about at the opening of this, where he has been incredibly ruthless with something else, but I'll talk about that later in the episode. Stay tuned for that. Danny Rose was also asked about his perceptions on his last 18 months at Spurs. He said, "People are going off what happened in the Amazon documentary, but you shouldn't believe everything that you hear and see on there, because ultimately that's fabricated to make the club look as good as possible, even if the stuff on it couldn't be further from the truth." Interesting. I mean, that makes sense. All those documentaries, they're edited in a way that they have to get clearance from the clubs. So there probably would have been a lot of stuff in that documentary that Daniel Levy and the club would have said they couldn't allow to be shown. He was then asked on his relationship with Jose Mourinho. Danny Rose said, "It was just a normal player-manager relationship. He came in and explained to me that he wanted to build up with a 3 at the back, and he mentioned that Ben Davies was probably more ideal for him in that role. And I don't think I disagree with him there, because I like to attack and get forward just as much as defending. So that was that, and you have to respect every manager's decision." There's not much to report. Another example there of Danny Rose just being totally grounded and honest. He says, actually, in terms of Mourinho, if he wanted to build up with a 3 at the back, slightly more sturdy and rigid and defensively, then Ben Davies was a better defender than I was. You don't hear many players being that honest. So very impressed with Rose talking here. He then goes on to say, talk about why he didn't make an appearance for Spurs until 3 years after he joined the club. He said, "Harry Redknapp and Tim Sherwood told me that my attitude wasn't correct and it needed to improve. After that, there was a change in how I trained, how I approached training, just a huge shift in my mentality. Tim would tell you that. Ever since then, Tim has been my biggest, not fan, but mentor. He pushed and pushed for me to get in that team. Without Tim, I'm not sure I would have got the opportunities that I did at Spurs." Yeah, Tim Sherwood always gets a lot of credit, doesn't he, for kind of bringing up all of those young Spurs players and making them into first-team players. And Pochettino really got the benefit of that. So although Tim Sherwood gets kind of laughed at a lot for his time in charge of Spurs as an interim manager and what happened on the bench with the Gilet, etc., he was a big part of what happened in Spurs during those golden years under Pochettino. Danny Rose was then asked about his debut goal, amazing goal, wasn't it, against Arsenal. He said, "It's funny that, because I would never ever do that now. That was more out of nerves, in that I didn't want to try to control the ball and lose it, and then Arsenal are on the counter-attack. Now I'd probably do anything but shoot. I'd look to control it or try to nutmeg somebody. I'd do anything but shoot. That was purely out of not wanting to lose the ball on the edge of the box. Luckily, I connected with it well and it went in." Yeah, one of the great goals in North London derby history. And that was a great interview with Danny Rose. Like I said at the beginning, not many players or ex-players give insights like that or as honest as that. And it does give a little look into the inner workings of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club under Daniel Levy. Speaking of whom, I did a little piece earlier this week, didn't I, about David Pleat releasing his book and talking a bit about his time as manager of Spurs and scouting at Spurs. In fact, David Pleat is pretty much the only person who's had experience of working under Irving Scholar, Alan Sugar and Daniel Levy, all three of those former chairman of Spurs over the past 40, 50 years or so. And he speaks a bit more about how it came that he lost his job as a scout at Spurs. He said, "Daniel Levy called me in and said, it's all data driven now. We don't need eyes and ears." To which David Pleat replies, "What nonsense." And then Pleat goes on to talk about his memoir, the autobiography, being written to raise money towards finding a cure for motor neuron disease. And David Pleat said this: "They're not going to sell it here," meaning at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Something to do with it not being through the club's official publisher. I asked Daniel Levy if I could have a room there to launch it and do a presentation. He said he'd get back to me. I'd not heard anything. It's funny. Arsenal gave Bob Wilson a seat for life. They're a classy club, Arsenal. Me, I was told I can get a ticket at Spurs, subject to availability. Subject to availability, David Pleat said. Mind you, Bob did much more for Arsenal than I ever did for Tottenham. So I think that is a very, not particularly subtle dig at Daniel Levy and disappointing treatment that he's found from David Pleat since being let go. Like I said, Levy is brutal and ruthless, but I wonder if yet again the terrible optics of this will come back to haunt Levy and maybe he'll have to do yet another quick U-turn and let David Pleat sell the book at the club, because similar to when he tried to furlough the staff during the lockdown, that is just such an ugly look for Daniel Levy. The proceeds of this book are going towards charity, towards trying to cure motor neuron disease. David Pleat has given many, many years to Tottenham Hotspur, and it's so easy just to say, let's let a book be sold at the stadium. Let's give David Pleat a room to have a launch of this book. I think just poor form from Daniel Levy. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I always say, I'm pretty neutral when it comes to, I'm not Enoch out, I'm not Enoch in, I'm not Levy out, I'm not Levy in. I just want Tottenham to keep growing as a club and for things to stay positive. But these optics that Daniel Levy comes up with, these decisions he makes that are just, it's so much easier to just say yes sometimes than to be so negative. And once again, very, very disappointing from him. Just some final Spurs news, really, and I'm including Harry Kane in the Spurs news here because I'm not a negative person towards Harry Kane just because he left for Bayern Munich. I think he had to do in the end what was best for him, and we got £100 million for him. And last night, as I'm sure you know, Harry Kane became the third player to score on his 100th appearance for England, after Sir Bobby Charlton in 1970 and Wayne Rooney in 2014. He scored his 67th and 68th goals for England, the second an absolute screamer, and he looked a lot sharper than he did against the Republic of Ireland the other day. Some stats about Harry Kane for the England's men's senior side. Most of these are as a result of his time at Tottenham Hotspur, by the way. He has scored the most goals for the men's senior side, most goals at Wembley, most goals as captain, the most penalties scored, most goals in a single year, most goals at major tournaments. He's had 1 World Cup Golden Boot, 1 European Championships Golden Boot, and like I said, the 10th player to win 100 caps for the Three Lions. What a legend Harry Kane is. That's why the mural is still up outside Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Maybe one day he'll come back to the club. Let me know in the comments below. Would you like Harry Kane to come back to the club? Say it was in 2-3 seasons time when he's like 33 or 34. Would you like him to have a last hurrah at Tottenham? I think it might happen. I've just got a feeling about it. And finally, actually, Mauricio Pochettino has finally signed on as the manager of the American national side. He said the following: "The decision to join the US men's national team wasn't just about football for me. It's about the journey that this team and this country are on. The energy, the passion, and the hunger to achieve something truly historic here. Those are the things that has inspired me." World Cup coming up in America in a couple of years' time. Pochettino will be leading them. He's a great manager. It looks to me like Lee Carsey will probably get the England job now. He's getting them playing some really nice stuff. And therefore, maybe that's why Pochettino has taken this jump to be the American national team manager. And I think he'll do a good job there. I really do. Before I just talk about briefly some other Premier League news, guys, please do press that like button. Really helps this video get seen by more people. And do subscribe. Really appreciate all your support as I push towards 15,000 subscribers. Want to get there as soon as possible. Building a really strong community of Spurs fans, but also hopefully some fans from other clubs too, as I bring Premier League news to you every single day. And you can listen to this on the podcast platforms too. Just type the Spurred On podcast into Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and give me a subscribe or follow there, and you can listen to this when you're out and about. Okay, starting in Man United, Brazilian winger Antony, who is now 24 years old, in my opinion, the worst Premier League signing of all time, alongside Nicola Pepe for Arsenal. He's reluctant to leave Manchester United though, despite interest from Fenerbahce in Turkey. Some more goings on from Chelsea. Chelsea have let leak to The Guardian that they've held talks about leaving Stamford Bridge and building a new stadium at Earl's Court. That's according to The Guardian, as I said. But yesterday, a statement straight away came back from the Earl's Court Development Company, who said the following: "There is no plan within our plans for Chelsea to relocate to the Earl's Court site. We have a fully detailed design shortly to be registered with both local authorities, which prioritises the delivery of thousands of homes and jobs, culture and open space through a well-designed and considered master plan, which has evolved over 4 years of engagement." So basically they're saying Chelsea may think that they have a chance of building a stadium on our land, but they do not. Some other Chelsea transfer news: Galatasaray, who are linked with lots of players from England, they're interested in signing 20-year-old England youth winger Carney Chukwuemeka on loan from Chelsea before their deadline shuts on Friday, I think it is. Over to Newcastle. Apparently Newcastle manager Eddie Howe and ex-sporting director of Spurs Paul Mitchell have resolved their differences and are now focusing on January transfer targets. Meanwhile, all the Super League clubs that were interested in Kieran Trippier from Newcastle have now given up because Newcastle have made it clear that they want to keep the former Tottenham and England defender. And finally, over to Everton. American businessman John Textor, who was a previous investor in Crystal Palace, is now confident that a deal to buy Everton could be completed in just 4 weeks. And for any Everton fan's sake, you've just got to hope that happens because they are in a mess. It's very likely that money will run out there in the next couple of months from everything I've heard and read from financial experts in football. They had enough cash flow for the first couple of months of this season, but unless they get a buyer in the next few months, huge trouble there. And of course, their new stadium is near completion, and it does look beautiful from the outside, I have to say. Take a look at that if you haven't already. It does look beautiful from the outside. It's no Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, but it will really be something if they're able to find the money to finish it all off. Okay, guys, thank you so much for watching and listening. I really appreciate it. As I said, if you haven't already, do press that like button. Do subscribe to the channel and become a member. Only £1 a month. All the detail how in the description box below, and it really helps me make this daily content for you. Have a great rest of your day. Cheers.